from Charlotte.
Los Angeles, July 2025. At first glance, everything seems the same. The ocean, the sun, the endless freeways, the film industry, the tourists. But this city is no longer the same. Just a few weeks before the events that would turn America upside down, a series of night raids by the Immigration Service swept through here. Hundreds of people were taken from their homes without trial or due process, including those who had lived in the country for more than 20 years. Buses with darkened windows moved through the city at night, and nobody said where they were going. Even journalists could not obtain lists of those detained. All data was classified. Officially, they said it was part of the fight against illegal immigration, but there were details that barely made it onto television. Those raids involved not only ICE officers, they were coordinated with the Department of Homeland Security and even military consultants. Many arrests took place without warrants, and the addresses were chosen using databases from mobile providers and leaked data from apps. Former agents would speak about this only after the scandal erupted. It meant that people were tracked by their digital footprint, by their geolocation, their phone calls, their messages. In the first few days, the city lived in fear. Nobody knew where the people had been taken. Hotlines either did not answer or repeated the same words. "We cannot disclose this information." Official media kept almost silent. A few short notes buried on the inner pages. But in Spanish-speaking neighborhoods, everything was boiling. There they understood that this was not just a temporary operation. It was a new policy from the White House to show that no city, not even one as wealthy and powerful as Los Angeles, could hide its residents. And so the first spontaneous gatherings began. People came to the ICE buildings with handmade signs that carried no slogans, only pleas. "Bring Mom back." "Where is my brother?" "We have lived here 20 years. In the first days, there were not even megaphones. They just stood silently in front of the locked doors. But with every passing day, the crowd grew. And here is what is important. From the very beginning, the police and local authorities received direct orders from above not to allow these people even close to federal buildings. This order came from Washington, and local officials understood that this protest was supposed to die quietly, but it did not die. People kept coming. Some brought water, others food. Some came with guitars. At first it was silent presence, then prayers and songs. They did not shout, but inside that silence there was a power that grew every day. At the same time, independent journalists began to gather facts. They discovered that the raids in Los Angeles were part of a program that used databases from Amazon, Uber, and even Facebook, analyzing people's movements through algorithms. This has never been officially confirmed, but the leak of that information became one of the reasons why people far removed from politics started coming out into the streets. They understood that anyone could be next, not just those the government labeled as illegal migrants. As this truth spread, the city began to change. Los Angeles, a city that had long been indifferent, slowly started to wake up. People stopped turning away from someone else's pain. And every evening, as the sun sank into the Pacific, hundreds of people remained outside the federal buildings, staring at the doors behind which their families had disappeared. It became a city that no longer slept, because every night could bring new raids. When people realized that hotlines remained silent, that lawyers could not find the detained, that the names of their loved ones did not appear on any lists, the city began to gather at ICE offices every evening. The first thing that distinguished these gatherings was that they were not organized by any party. This was a spontaneous reaction. Hundreds of families who had nowhere else to go simply began waiting outside the doors of those who had taken their loved ones. At first, they were treated as background. The police did not even look at them. But very soon, the situation changed. On July 2, 2025, new rules came into force in Los Angeles. Any mass gathering near a federal building was to be considered a breach of security protocol. This came from a classified memorandum of the Department of Homeland Security, which journalists would later publish. From that day forward, barricades and cordons appeared on every corner. Nevertheless, people kept coming. In the evenings, they were joined by others who had lost no one: teachers, students, even doctors from hospitals who had seen nurses taken away in the middle of the night. At night, they lit candles and sang songs in Spanish and English, sometimes just lullabies. These songs were recorded on phones, posted on TikTok and Instagram, and within a few days, millions of people had watched them. Social media did what television refused to do. It showed that this was not just politics. These were families disappearing. The authorities responded more harshly. Within a week, at the direct order of Washington, lists of all participants were requested, compiled using facial recognition from city surveillance cameras. These images were collected without a court order and without informing anyone. This fact surfaced later when CNN journalists gained access to internal police correspondence. It stated clearly, all faces to be forwarded to DHS, cross-check with immigration databases. That was the turning point. Protesters realized that not only were they not being heard, they were being tracked. And then, on July 4th, Independence Day, came what they called the March of Silence. A column of more than 10,000 people walked through the center of Los Angeles, holding only photographs of their loved ones. No slogans, only faces. This march was not planned by any organization. It was born on social media in a single day, and it became the spark. Television was forced, for the first time, to show everything live, not because it wanted to, but because the center of the city was impossible to hide. After the march, federal channels began to use another word: illegal demonstrations. But the footage, already seen around the world, showed the truth. Children sitting on the asphalt, elderly people holding signs, and a silence louder than any shouting. That silence was dangerous, because it was no longer fear, it had become resistance. On July 5, 2025, the day after the march, additional police forces entered the city. By order from Washington, the elite BORTAC unit, a tactical group from Customs and Border Protection, usually deployed along the border, was sent into residential neighborhoods. This was the first signal that the authorities were preparing for a forceful scenario. The crowd gathered in front of the federal courthouse. Once again, it began with silence. But this time, the demonstrators were met not just by police. Cordons in front of the building stood armored vehicles. For several hours, the people stood their ground, while above them helicopters hovered motionless in the hot July sky. Journalists wrote that the scene looked like a rehearsal for martial law. The first clash came when the police moved in to disperse the crowd and clear a path for the ICE buses. No one could tell what exactly happened in that first second. Someone bumped into a barricade, someone shouted, a few people fell to the ground. Within a minute, cameras recorded the burst of tear gas and the explosions of flashbang grenades. The official reports later stated that riots broke out after an officer was attacked, but the video footage showed clearly that it wasn't true. It was a baton that came first. That day marked the beginning of what would later be called the largest street clashes in California in the past 20 years. The center of the city came to a standstill. Across social media, videos spread showing people building barricades out of trash bins while military vehicles blocked the intersections. By evening, a curfew and a state of emergency had been declared. 240 people were officially detained in a single night. Among them were random passers-by and journalists. The next day, the first units of the National Guard entered the city. According to documents that later leaked to the press, the White House had already prepared, back in late June, a plan called Operation Restore Order LA. It called for the deployment of 4 100 National Guard troops, and 700 Marines. This was no improvisation. The scenario for using military forces had been ready long before. Los Angeles came under military control. By that time, the protests had already ceased to be just a political demonstration. People were now resisting not only the raids themselves, but the very feeling that their voices meant nothing. Fires broke out in the streets, not just the fires in trash containers, but the fire of anger, the one that could not be drowned out by tear gas. For the first time in a long time, Los Angeles, the capital of movies and illusions, began to look like a documentary about what happens when a government stops listening to its own people. When you watch those scenes from above, from the helicopters that hovered over Los Angeles in July of 2025, it all looks like a river of people and smoke. But if you come down to the street, everything changes. It is no longer a crowd. Here, there are stories, and each of these stories matters more than the statistics. Sofia Alvarez, 19 years old. She came out into the street on the very first day after the raid, holding a photograph of her parents. In the picture, they stood in front of a small house in East Los Angeles that they had spent 10 years building with their own hands. On the night of June 21, they were taken away without a warrant. This family never even appeared in the official ICE bulletins because they were detained based on a list compiled through phone geolocation data. For a week, Sofia tried to find them in detention centers, but the only answer she received was, "We cannot disclose this information." She was left alone. CNN cameras filmed her at the moment she knelt before a police line, holding up the photograph above her head. That image became one of the symbols of the protests. James Miller, 42 years old, a Marine veteran who had served in Afghanistan. He was never arrested, never personally threatened. But when he saw a family from his neighborhood in San Pedro taken away in the middle of the night, he realized he could no longer just watch. He came to the protest carrying a handmade sign that read, "America is not fear." That sign appeared in Reuters photographs, and later it was shown in Congress during hearings about the use of force against peaceful demonstrators. For James, the protest became personal because he could not accept that in the country he had fought for, people now lived in fear. Ricardo Nunez, 34 years old, a photojournalist covering the protests for an independent media outlet. On July 5th, during the dispersal in front of the federal courthouse, he was shot in the face with a rubber bullet, the moment clearly captured in a video that would later become evidence in a court case against the Los Angeles Police Department. His camera fell onto the asphalt, and the lens through which he had shown people the truth now became part of that truth itself. After this, a hashtag appeared on social networks, Eyes of Ricardo, and within a week, millions of posts appeared under it, people uploading pictures taken with their own eyes to show what they saw. But these three stories are just the tip of the iceberg. Internal police documents, published later by ProPublica, revealed that more than 575 people arrested in Los Angeles were random passers-by rather than organizers of the protests. Among them were 42 students, 17 elderly citizens, and even 2 doctors. They were all caught simply because they happened to be on the streets when the city stopped being safe. Everything happening on the streets was labeled riots by the official channels, but those who were there saw something else. They saw a mother covering her child with her body as a flashbang grenade exploded overhead. They saw teenagers carrying boxes of bottled water, handing them out to people choking in the gas. They saw an elementary school teacher holding a sign above her head that read, "My students are my children. Do not take their parents away." These images went viral because they contained something that could not be censored: simple human pain. Later, journalists discovered that throughout the entire month of July 2025, an automatic facial recognition system operated in Los Angeles, recording everyone who appeared on camera. These images were sent directly to federal databases. This meant that anyone who simply came out to support the protest was placed under surveillance. This fact only became known in August, but it explains why so many began to wear masks not only to protect themselves from gas, but to hide from the cameras. In these days, the protest ceased to be politics. It became personal. Every person in those streets was holding not just a sign, but a face or a name. And the more the state applied pressure, the clearer it became that behind this confrontation, there were no slogans, only real, individual lives. When the clashes in Los Angeles began, the White House did not wait for the situation to calm on its own. On July 6, 2025, a plan with the code name Operation Restore Order LA was activated in Washington, not an improvised decision, but a pre-prepared scenario, the documents of which would later leak to the press. In those documents, marked for official use only, it was written plainly, if events escalate, deploy the National Guard, Marines, and DHS units to gain full control over the unrest zone. Within 48 hours, the forces were in place, 100 National Guard troops and 700 Marines. At dawn on July 7, the first columns of military vehicles rolled into the city. Trucks full of soldiers moved down empty streets where shop windows were boarded up, while residents filmed everything on their phones. Those images, armored vehicles against the backdrop of palm trees and neon lights, would later be shown around the world. ChatGPT Skazao. Officially, the White House announced, this is a temporary measure to restore order and protect law-abiding citizens. But the documents published in August by The Intercept told a very different story. The operation included around-the-clock patrols, drones equipped with thermal cameras, continuous monitoring of entire neighborhoods, and the isolation of so-called high-risk sectors. Los Angeles was, in effect, carved up into zones that no one could enter without passing through a checkpoint. On the night of July 7 to July 8, MQ-9 Reaper drones appeared over the city, the very same drones normally used in overseas military operations. This was the first time in U.S. history that such aircraft had been deployed on this scale for surveillance inside the country. Video recorded by residents confirmed it. In the skies over the southern part of the city, drones circled at low altitude, capturing every single movement. Journalists uncovered another fact. BORTAC tactical units, the elite special forces of Customs and Border Protection, had been deployed in the city. Normally, these units are used to detain dangerous criminals along the border, but this time they operated in residential neighborhoods. Their presence in Los Angeles was classified, and the first mention of it appeared only after one of these men was caught on camera arresting a student. On the ground, it looked like a city under siege. Major intersections and bridges were blocked with checkpoints, guarded by soldiers holding rifles. Live broadcasts showed reporters in downtown Los Angeles as the military unrolled coils of razor wire, building barriers, something the city had never seen before. Neighborhoods were split in two. Some lived under constant patrol, others were completely sealed off. According to official reports, 575 people were arrested in the first 3 days of the operation. But internal briefings, later published by the Los Angeles Times, revealed that only 14% of them had any connection to violence or organizing demonstrations. The rest were simply passers-by, or people who had pulled out a phone to record what was happening. Every evening, federal news channels repeated the same phrase, "The situation is under control." But what the residents saw was very different. The helicopters never left the skies, even at night. Searchlights swept across rooftops and backyards. In some districts, internet and mobile networks began to falter. Experts later concluded this was deliberate signal blocking to prevent videos and live streams from spreading out of the epicenter. And during those days, Los Angeles stopped being just a city. It became a symbol of what can happen when a government decides to act against its own citizens as if they were an enemy force. People in the streets began to realize this was no longer just a protest. This was a fight for the right to be heard. 2 weeks passed. Los Angeles felt as if it had burned out from the inside. The streets that just recently had been filled with columns of people were now empty. The air no longer smelled of gas. There were no sirens, no helicopters. But the silence that returned was not peaceful, it was heavy. By July 20, 2025, 137 people had been officially arrested. Of those, 575 had been detained during the first 3 days. More than 50 sustained serious injuries. These were the numbers read out in Congress, but they did not reflect what the residents themselves saw. They saw schools guarded by armed soldiers, parks where children could no longer play after dark, and children who burst into tears at the sight of a uniform. Internal documents, later published by the Los Angeles Times, confirmed the worst fears. The data from facial recognition systems and the drones had been used to build a database of all participants, and those databases were not destroyed even after the operation ended. This meant that everyone who had even once been in the protest zone was now under observation. Officials declared that order has been restored. The White House issued a press release saying, "We have demonstrated determination and the strength of law." But the people who had lived through those 2 weeks in a city under siege knew the truth. Nothing had gone back to the way it was. As the armored vehicles left the streets, Los Angeles began to look like a city recovering from a natural disaster. In the city center, the traces of burnt barricades were still visible. Shop windows were shattered, and walls were covered with the words, "We are here." Some neighborhoods never regained their tourists. But the biggest change was in the atmosphere. People began to look at each other differently. They knew that the raids could come again on any night. They knew the state could bring a city to its knees in just 48 hours. And at the same time, they knew that a single column of people walking silently with photographs in their hands could make the entire world look at their pain. Journalists analyzing the events of July 2025 wrote, "This was not a victory for either side. It was a reminder that in America it is still possible to lose something we always thought untouchable, the feeling that your home is safe." Los Angeles returned to life. Children went back to school, restaurants opened, the lights of Hollywood came on again. But every evening, as the sun sinks into the ocean, the city still holds the shadow of those days, because now Los Angeles is a city that will never truly sleep again. And while Los Angeles lived under siege, news began to come in from other cities. In San Diego, San Francisco, and Austin, people took to the streets carrying the same photographs and handmade signs. There were no armored vehicles there yet, no drones overhead. But in the faces of those columns there was the same look, the look of people who no longer wanted to be silent. In Houston, a student protest ended just like in Los Angeles. Tear gas, dozens of arrests, campuses closed. In San Francisco, doctors walked out into the streets as entire hospital teams wearing white coats as if for the last time, standing up not only for their patients but for their families. According to human rights organizations, by the end of July, 2025 protests had taken place in more than 40 American cities. And even though the official channels showed only chaos, for those who had been out there in the streets, it was not chaos at all. It was the only way to say, "We are here. We are alive. We will not disappear."